when you get through the book of Judges, you're sitting in a manure pile. And then all of a sudden the book of Ruth comes along and you go, whew, boy, I'm glad there's some sweet smelling something around here.
Okay, so in the last segment, we learned the acronym CUFNAB. Now, what do you have for us in this segment?
Well, I have another acronym, only this time it's BASKET.
And what's BASKET going to be all about?
Well, in this segment, we talk about the early years of Israel and how God's story began weaving through the Old Testament.
I know you have a true passion for the history of Israel, so these next few segments are going to be fascinating.
All right, so now you already understand the first 11 chapters of Genesis. The whole flow, his story for mankind. Before we move on to Israel, this will be real quick. Let's find out the books that support the story of mankind. There are only 2 books. Anyone guess what they are? Genesis. What else?
Job.
I heard it.
Job.
Job. Okay. Genesis and Job. Job is most like the first Old Testament book. Job is from the land of Uz. We think Uz is over there somewhere in Midian. And this is before Abraham came on the scene. And so you have the book of Genesis up to chapter 11, and then the book of Job. They're the only 2 books that deal with this time period. But now we want to talk about his story for Israel. And now we have to cover Genesis 12 through Malachi. All right, let's do that. What's the story about Israel? Well, let's look at it. Genesis 12 to Malachi. Now, to remember these 5 events, what do we remember about mankind? What were the 2 words?
Kufnab.
Kufnab. Kufnab. All right, this is a lot easier. Basket. Not even 2 words, 1 word. And just think of it. If you remember 3 words, you know the Old Testament. All you have to do is fill in the spaces. All right? All right, let's look at this. To remember these 5 events, think in terms of the word basket, and we're going to add a vowel. The A will be the vowel that we add. B, beginnings. Now, we're not going back to creation. We're talking about the beginning of the nation of Israel. Beginnings. A means nothing. S is settlement. After they started, and when you start going through that whole period and they are expanding, and all of a sudden another Pharaoh grows up in Egypt that doesn't know Joseph, and then they are in enslavement and everything else. God raises up Moses, and then they wander for 40 years, etc., etc. And then it's time to go into the land under Joshua. That's settlement. From settlement, we go to kingdom, because Israel asked for a king. We want to be like everybody else, all the other nations around us. Give us a king. God wasn't good enough for them. Give us a king. We want to see the king ride out on his white horse. We want to see a king, a mighty and powerful king that's going to provide for us, that's going to protect us. God told Samuel, don't worry about it. Give him a king. They haven't rejected you. They've rejected me. E stands for exile. Because of the rebelliousness of the people of Israel, God brings in 2 different groups at 2 different times. And here we have the nation of Judah going into captivity for 70 years. Finally, the triumphal return. So, if you can remember Kuf and Nab, you got the first 11 chapters. If you can remember basket, you have the rest of the Old Testament. Well, what's the story about this? The story is about Israel. And what books support the story of Israel? That's what we'll look at now. Beginnings. Go back to around 2100 BC. God, in his own grace and for reasons known only to himself, he goes into an area where there's all kinds of idolatry, idolatrous worship. And he reaches down to a man who was brought up in a family of idolatry. And he plucks him out of the fire, so to speak. And he says to him, go to the land that I will show you. Now this man, if he were living today, we would call him an Iraqi because God visited Iraq and got this man that we call Abraham. And he goes down to Ur of the Chaldeans, and that's in Iraq. And he says, you follow me. I'm going to take you to a land. And the Bible tells us that Abraham obeyed not knowing where he was going. He was following the Lord, but he had no idea where he was going to end up. He gets up as far as Haran, which is north of Canaan, and he stops there for a period of time until his father Terah died, and then he comes in to the land. Let's look at Genesis chapter 12, because there's some precious promises here in this passage that we find have already been fulfilled. The Lord said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. What's been fulfilled? I'll make you into a great nation, nation of Israel. But there are many other nations that came out of Abraham. I will make your name great. 3 great world religions call Abraham father: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. If you wonder why the Lord is still blessing the United States and hasn't cursed us as our sins deserve, it's because we are still blessing Israel. And the day we stop blessing Israel, don't be surprised that God takes his hands off of us. And all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. What's he talking about? Through Abraham comes Messiah. And all the world is blessed through Messiah because Messiah was the Lamb of God to take away the sins of the world. So already these promises have been fulfilled. Later on, chapter 13 and then on chapter 15, he talks about the land that God was going to give. And they would have the land forever. And that land, they were removed from the land back in 70 A.D. First 586 B.C. and then 70 A.D. They were taken away from the land. For 2,000 years, they were not back in the land as a nation. In 1948, they come back to the land as a nation with their own government. Now, according to Ezekiel chapter 37, 38, we know that they come back in unbelief, but one of these days they will turn and look upon him whom they have pierced. And the Spirit of God will come upon them, and they will, as a nation, believe in their Messiah. All right, the beginning starts with Abraham. Abraham has 2 sons. God promised him a son. You'll be the father of many nations. Years go by, still no son. And he says, oh, Lord, you promised me a son. Will Eliezer of Damascus be my heir? And God says, no, look up there at the stars. If you can count the stars, that's how many sons you're going to have. Wow. So Abraham waits, and he waits, and he waits, and he waits. And God says, look, the son's going to come from your body. Okay, he waits. Finally, both he and his wife Sarah are fed up, and look, let's help God out. I mean, he made a promise. We don't want him to be embarrassed. Let's help him out. Abram, you go in unto my handmaiden Hagar and have a child with him, or with her. And so Hagar bears a child, calls him Ishmael. And about 12 years later, God shows up again. Abram, remember when I said the son will come from your body? And they neglected to tell you that that son will also come from your wife's body. Uh-oh. But what about Ishmael? Ishmael is about 12 years old at this time. Well, I'm going to bless Ishmael. But the son of my blessing will be Isaac. And so Isaac was blessed. Now we have the patriarchs. And then Isaac has two sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob steals the birthright from Esau, and now the blessing comes through Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. The 11th son is a man by the name of Joseph. Jacob really loves Joseph and seems to treat him better than he treats the other sons, and those other sons are so angry with Joseph that they want to kill him, but they decide not to kill him. They will sell him to a caravan going down to Egypt. Joseph goes down to Egypt, and there he is sold to Potiphar, and eventually he is thrown in prison for something he didn't do, and he's in prison, languishing in prison, until the Pharaoh has a dream, and no one can interpret his dream, and he hears about this Jewish boy, Joseph, that he interprets dreams. So, he brings him out of prison. Joseph interprets the dream of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh makes him number 2 in Egypt. And then a famine comes in the land, and Jacob sends his other sons down to Egypt to buy grain from the Egyptians. And when these sons come down, they see Joseph. They don't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them. I love that scene where they eventually he lets them know, I'm your brother, the one you sold, the one you hated. And they go, oh, he says, don't worry, I've forgiven you. You meant it for harm, but God meant it for good. He was able to see beyond his hurt and see the sovereignty of God, that God meant it for good. And so Joseph brings the entire family down to Egypt, and so they begin to thrive in Egypt. And then a Pharaoh comes to power who did not know anything about Joseph. And these people are multiplying more and more and more. And finally, this Pharaoh says, look, these people are going to be so numerous, they're going to take over our people, our entire land. Let's enslave them. And so they are enslaved. They are enslaved for 430 years. And they start crying out to God. As they cry out to God, God hears their cry. And God raises up a man in the book of Exodus chapter 3 by the name of Moses. Now Moses was a man who was actually brought up as an Egyptian. He knew the Egyptian language. He knew the Egyptian culture. He dressed like an Egyptian. He thought like an Egyptian. Basically, he was Egyptian except for the truth that his mother built into him. And God uses Moses to deliver the people. And the people are delivered, but because of their rebelliousness, they have to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. They could have, in a few months, gotten from where they were right into the land of promise. But because of the rebellious nature, God had them wander for the 40 years. And so they wandered for 40 years. And because Moses did not honor God in a specific event that took place, God said to Moses, Moses, I'm going to take you up there to Mount Pisgah, up there at Mount Nebo. You can look over into the promised land, but you cannot go there. You bring Joshua before me. You lay your hands on Joshua. Joshua is the man that I have chosen to take the people into the land. And so Joshua is brought into the picture, and this begins the era of settlement. Now they go into the land. It takes a while to possess the land. And after they are in the land for a period of time, after a few generations, we find that people are again rebelling against God. And the Bible tells us every man did what was right in his own eyes. They weren't following an absolute truth. They were all making up their truth as they go along. Sound familiar? I mean, if you look at America today, you can say we live in a period of the judges. If we're going to compare our culture with the culture of the judges, the whole philosophy, the worldview, no absolute truth. What is true to you may not be true to me. So we all make up our own truth. And that's what they did in the time of the judges. And then eventually God raises up a man by the name of Samuel. And we finish this period of settlement. What are the books that you find in the beginnings, in the settlement? Well, the books for the beginnings are very easy because it's actually the Torah. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That was all written at the time, or talking about the time of the beginnings, throughout the period of the patriarchs, right into the time of Moses. When it comes to the settlement, you have the book of Joshua, the book of Judges, but then there's a very sweet book that goes in there. After reading Judges, Judges is horrible to read. You have this cycle. They call upon the Lord delivers them, and after the Lord delivers them, they go back into sin. So God brings judgment, they call out to the Lord delivers them by bringing up another judge. By the way, these aren't judges in black robes, these are actually rulers, these are leaders, these are like mini kings. And he raises up a judge and delivers them, and they have peace for a while, and then they fall back into sin. And this goes on and on and on throughout that whole period of Judges. Well, this wonderful book is the book of Ruth. And it's set right in there. That she is the rose among the thorns, and the rose in the manure pile. Well, when you get through the book of Judges, you're sitting in the manure pile. And then all of a sudden the book of Ruth comes along and you go, whew, boy, I'm glad there's some sweet smelling something around here. Also, 1 Samuel, but it's only the first 7 chapters of 1 Samuel.
Well, Rick, to me, the best part of this study is that you're really detailing the Old Testament, but yet in simple terms. And even I could give my friends a detailed overview of the Old Testament with the words cuff, nab, and basket.
Well, we're on our way for sure. So far, we've covered God's story for mankind. And now God's story for Israel is halfway through. However, we're not finished with the Old Testament. Jason, any idea what's up next?
Well, since we've done beginnings and settlement, that means that kingdom and exile and triumphal return are yet to come.
Hey, you've been a good listener.
Well, should we go ahead and roll the next segment?
Let's go.